Well, good morning. You made it through the first day of Data Summit. Yay! So if there's anybody in the room who was not here yesterday, I'm Mary D. Ojala, and I'm the conference program director for Data Summit. And I do a bunch of other stuff, but I told you all that yesterday, so I'm not going to repeat it. So yesterday, who learned something new? Anybody? Yeah, right. That's what makes a successful conference, is the learning opportunities. Just the logistics, as with yesterday, tracks A and B are here on this floor. DevOps and AI is one floor up on the 4th floor. And on the 4th floor, of course, I'm sure you've already found it, is the exhibitor area. The showcase will close today at 2. That's right after lunch. So take the opportunity to visit with our sponsors, our exhibitors, before that 2 o'clock closing. We do have just a few scheduled changes. There are 3 keynote speeches this morning. We will start with Laura, and then we will go to the sponsored keynote from Neo4j, and At Scale will follow Neo4j, so we're switching those two. The other announcement I have is that session C204 in the DevOps is canceled due to illness. Okay, now let's go to the real reason you are here, which is to listen to Laura Sebastian-Coleman talk about data quality deniers. I hope none of you are data quality deniers. I don't think she's taking a poll on this, so I think that'll be okay. Laura is Data Quality Director at Prudential Financial. She's worked in data quality management since 2003, and she's got a new book coming out. So I'm very excited to have Laura on the program for this morning. So let me turn it over to Laura.
Thanks, Mary D. Thanks, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a Massachusetts girl by birth. I grew up in Framingham, so it's fun to be back in my home state, although I'm not very far away. I'm only in Connecticut. So, as Mary D. said, I'm going to talk about data quality deniers and what we learned from them, and I'm going to figure out how, there we go. All right, that's all my stuff. We don't have to go through that. It's in the slides. I want to talk about this concept of data quality deniers, but my real goal today is to kind of convince you that a lot of what we do in data quality management at its heart is about common sense and applying common sense. And so part of what I want to do is share that with you, and I want you guys to be able to walk away from this talk with some common sense mechanisms and techniques for talking about data quality in your organizations. So I'm going to do this first by sharing a couple of stories. These are actual true stories. And then I'm going to step back from that and talk about the purposes of data quality management and my model of data quality management. And then we'll talk about the deniers. And the deniers are really a set of perspectives that can get in the way of improving the quality of data within an organization. And more importantly than those themselves are what we can learn from them, right, from these perspectives. And then I want to talk about that and how to apply what you've learned. So as I said, I'm going to start with 2 stories. The first story is about zip code. So I shared a sample of data that looked just reasonably close to this one. I've changed a few things here. But I shared this sample of data with a group of analysts who were learning to use profiling tools and techniques. And I asked them what I think is a simple question, right? The question I always ask with respect to profiling is you look at a column distribution or you look at a data set and you say, does this data make sense? Is it okay? Right, that's the first question. And I got a surprising answer, and that surprising answer was, yeah, it's okay, sure, no problem. And I was like, really? Because I'm seeing some problems here, right? So for example, I'm seeing missing zip codes, I'm seeing default zip codes, and I'm seeing missing state codes. And so I said, well, you know, why do you think it's okay? And they said, well, you know, in our production database, it looks like that. I've seen zeros, I've seen nulls, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. It means your profiling tool is working correctly. It's reflecting what's actually in the production database, but it's not okay. It's not okay to have nulls in a zip code. It's not okay to have defaults in a zip code unless there's a reason for it. And from the surface, it's not okay. So second story. Again, I shared this data, well, not exactly this data, I've changed the names to protect the personal identities of the people involved, but data that fit this pattern, I shared with a group of people who are running a production support function, and I asked the same question, which is this data okay? And I got another surprising answer, and that answer was, how would I know? How would I know? How would I know, right? So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, really? Why do you say you can't know this? And they say, well, I'm not the business. You know, the business knows the data. I don't know the data. And I'm thinking, this is a unique identifier. It's a technical field. And we have people, we have the same identifier associated with multiple people, and we have a person who's more than one identifier, or someone who seems to be one person, and then we have two people who are definitely two people, but they have shared identifiers, and then we have a whole group of people with the same identifier. And you've probably already guessed that, you know, for some reason, this process chose email address as a way of assigning unique identification. That itself is questionable, but the question about whether this is okay is a simple question, and people answered it essentially wrong. It's not okay, right? So what's really behind this? So there's problems with the data, but the real problem here is that people look at the data and they say it's okay and it's not. They are afraid to answer questions. They don't know why they're being asked questions in the first place. And they think somebody else should know the answer, and it's somehow magical, right? And when I look at that, and again, I'm thinking about what are the root causes here, right? There's, at the root cause is some kind of fear. People are afraid of being embarrassed. They're afraid of getting the answer wrong. That is understandable. We're taught that early. They're also afraid of being held accountable. Like if you say, no, Laura, that data isn't right, it looks wrong to me, I'm going to say to you, well, you know, that's your fault. It's your fault that you saw that the data was wrong. So they're afraid of accountability. And then I think there's two other things here. One is just a pessimism about data, like we can't get it right, it can't be of high quality, we can't, it's not reliable. And then this comes from really, in my mind, a lack of understanding about what you can do to manage the quality of data and what, in fact, you can do to manage the quality of any product or service. So there's a lack of understanding about that. Now, there's reasons why people don't understand that, and I won't go into those reasons today. That would be the subject of another talk. But there's also solutions. So let's step back and look at what is data quality management? Why is it important? What are the problems it's trying to solve? So the first thing that you need to know about data quality management is that it is the application of quality management techniques to data. These techniques have a long history. They really came into their own about 100 years ago in the 1920s when folks like Walter Shewhart and Edward Deming started applying those techniques, statistical process control, those kinds of things, to the manufacturing of physical goods, and then others began to apply them to services. So anybody who's done total quality management or Six Sigma, those kinds of things, those are instances of these techniques. And what these have shown is that you can improve efficiency, you can you can reduce waste, you can actually measurably improve quality of manufactured goods and services, and that this has a direct effect on customer satisfaction. You get higher quality results. So we take that idea, and then we take what we all know, which is that data is incredibly important to today's organizations. This is sort of a rhetorical question, but just to make my point, how many of you work in an organization where there is a data science program of some kind? All right, so everybody's somehow working in data science, and the presumption of data science is that if you have data about your customers and about your interactions with them and about your products, that you can learn from that data. You can identify opportunities, you can reduce risks, you can make better decisions, right? So we all know that data plays this really important role in organizations. And even if it didn't, even if we didn't have data science and analytics and all those things, data is an operational necessity. You can't ship products without it. You can't interact with your customers without it, and the like. So we all know the importance of data in organizations. And we've all seen the impacts of poor quality data, and we all envision data that is of high enough quality so we can get the value we want to from those processes. So this is kind of, I would say, common sense knowledge about what data is, the role it plays, and that you can apply these techniques to it. So I like to keep my model of data quality management very simple, because most people don't need to know all the nuances of how you calculate sigmas and all those things, right? For me, data quality management boils down to understanding 3 questions, being able to answer these within your own organization, not abstractly, but within your own organization, right? The first is, how do you define quality, right? What do you mean by high quality data? And depending on what your organization does and such, you may have different focal points for that and different techniques for defining that. The second is kind of the underbelly of that question, right? It's how do you detect data that is of low quality? So if you think about that one, it's, how do you find issues? How do you find errors? Those kinds of things. And then the third is, what do you do about it? What actions do you take when you have low quality data? So the first question is about customer expectations. Who's using the data and what do they need? The second is about obstacles, what things get in the way and how to prevent them. And then the third is about actually prioritizing and applying what you know so that you can make things better, and especially preventing errors and improvement over time and the like. So if we think about those 2 ideas, the questions that you need to answer and the idea of applying these methodologies, then the second model that I'm sharing with you is really an improvement cycle for data quality management. And you can see that it starts with the definition, defining standards, rules, and the like, then understanding current state, assessing the data in your organization, what shape it's in comparison to those rules. From that, you will discover issues. Those issues need to be managed in some way. At least they need to be acknowledged. You also will see opportunities for implementing controls such as data quality monitoring, but also very simple controls such as edits in your input system. You want to use the information that you get from the controls to actually monitor what you're getting, because there are certain things you can prevent, and then other data quality questions or issues come up as data changes over time. You want to communicate that information to your stakeholders, the customers of your data. Those are the people that care about what condition the data's in. And that involves reporting. And then ultimately, you want to be able to act on improvement opportunities. So this is an improvement cycle, a basic one, but specific to data quality management. And it aligns with the 3 questions. Defining standards and rules, that's really about saying, this is what makes our data of high quality. When we look at the other pieces of assessment and the like, that's trying to understand what could be of low quality, and finally, taking a series of actions to actually improve the quality of data. So when you see it on a slide like this, and it's fairly simple, you might ask, well, that's simple. What's the problem? Why, what gets in the way? And what gets in the way really is the way that people respond to data. So the things that the two stories I shared illustrate, right? There are different ways in which people avoid the question of quality with respect to data. I'm going to give you a set of 6 stereotypes or perspectives or personalities to kind of illustrate the spectrum of attitudes towards this. And then, as I said, we'll talk about what we learned from each of these. And just as my stories about the zip code and the unique identifier actually came from actual experience, the quotes and such that I have here are things people have actually said to me when I've had conversations with them about data quality. So the first kind of denier is what I call the straightforward denier. And these folks essentially think there are no problems. So they say things like, everything's fine. Everything's fine. And if you say, how do you know? They may pull a magical statistic out of the air or from somewhere else, and they'll say, well, we're 98% accurate. And I'm always tempted to say, wow, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I haven't actually, and I'm considered an expert on measurement, and I can't figure out how you measure accuracy unless you actually have the real world to measure against, right? So if you say, well, whoa, great, how do you measure that? They'll say something like, well, no one's complained. Or, we're making money, the company works. Okay, so there must be no problems, right? The second group is what I call technicians. And these folks don't actually have an opinion about the quality of the data, but they think most problems can be solved through technology. They may not even know what those problems are, but they're willing to try to solve them through technology. And I'm not saying you can't improve things through technology, but they'll say things like, oh, we profiled the data and there were all these nulls. I actually had somebody tell me that it was a problem that in address line 4, in address instance 3, there was no data, and that's an issue. And I was like, okay, I don't think so. So, and they'll talk about tools without really talking about why we use tools or what the goals are and the like. And then if you press them, what do you want to do with that? They'll say things like, we'll automate that. I actually had someone say to me just yesterday, when we were talking about trying to collect definitions from specifications and such, he said, we can automate that. I said, okay, show me. Show me how you magically get this stuff, because I'm not seeing it. So. The third is kind of the disillusioned technician, or potentially the disillusioned straightforward denier, someone who knows that the quality of data is poor, but they don't think that they have anything to do with it. I call them the not my jobbers. And they say things like, well, the source, we can't do anything about the source, or, you have to be the business to understand that. They have to take care of it, or, garbage in, garbage out, we can't do anything about it. Right, so they eschew any responsibility. Now we move kind of across to the next set of deniers. One is the perfectionist, and these folks know a little bit about data quality management, and they assume that the goal is to get everything perfect, and if you can't meet that goal, there's no point in doing it. So they say things like, and they're kind of passive-aggressive, let's face it, they're passive-aggressive, like, you don't expect everything to be 100% accurate, do you? And of course, you can't answer that question, right? Answering that question is like answering the question, have you stopped beating your partner, right? If you say yes, people are going to be like, why were you doing that? If you say no, they're like, why do you keep doing that, right? So, and from a data quality perspective, if you say, no, I don't think everything needs to be 100% accurate, you're going to undermine your credibility. If you say you do want that, they're going to see that it's impossible. And it's impossible to manage all of this stuff, right? Which brings us to the scientist skeptic. And these folks latch on to concepts within data quality management, and the one that seems to be their favorite to sink their teeth into is actually the idea of fitness for purpose. And instead of saying, okay, now we understand something about data quality management, fitness for purpose, they say, you know, you can't possibly know all the purposes that data will be used for. So therefore, somehow you can't manage it because you can't get all the thresholds right, and they might change over time. You know, so they envision the process, but they envision it in a way that makes it seem impossible to achieve. And finally, we get to the accountant. And sometimes these guys are real accountants, and other times they're just people who account for things in their mind. And the main thing they account for is cost. And only one kind of cost, the cost of any kind of improvement or actually changing how you work with your data. So they ask, you know, about tooling, and they ask about the costs of remediation, and they ask about budgets and who's going to pay for what, and they say that we don't have time to invest in improvement. Anything that has improvement in the title, that seems like an extra and not something you want to focus on. So here's our array, and the real question is, what do we learn from them? And we learn a range of things, so I'll take them one at a time. The straightforward deniers, they skip question 1 on the survey of what's important to manage the quality of data. They don't have standards. They're not thinking about the uses of data and how the quality of data impacts use. So they're not talking, essentially they're not talking to their customers. They're not talking to their customers. And so what we learn is you've got to talk to your customers, right? The people that are using the data are the people that are feeling the pain of poor quality, and they're also, by the way, the people that bring value to your organization, right? Because if we think about the life cycle of data, and there's lots of folks who have written about the life cycle of data, there's only 2 points, there's only 1 point in that life cycle where you actually create value, right? And that is when you use the data. Everything else within the data lifecycle, managing data, creating it, obtaining it, maintaining it, all of those are costs. And when you use the data, you get value from it. So the customers, the people that use it, are the most important people. And they have requirements. So get those requirements on paper, make them explicit, make them shareable, and get feedback and build out a body of standards for your data. When we look at the technician, once again, what we learn is not that what they're saying is true, but in fact that they don't actually think about quality at all, right? And because they don't think about what it is to have data of high quality, they often aren't thinking about the complexity of how data is created, right, through people and processes and technology within your organization. So you have to recognize those connections. It's not just technical, it's not just process, and it's not just people. It's all three together. So you have to see that. Data binds the organization together, and the organization depends on data, but sometimes in positive and sometimes in negative ways. The Not My Jobbers give you an additional level of perspective on this role that data plays and how it connects the organization, right? All processes that touch data have the potential to impact the quality of that data. You know, when it's first created, when it's moved from place to place, when you assign a unique identifier for it using logic that doesn't really hold up, all of those things can affect the quality of data. So one of the jobs of a data quality management team is to raise that awareness of those connections and the ways that different people along the data chain are impacted by poor quality. From the perfectionist who thinks everything should be perfect and everything's equal, we learn, no, everything is not equal. All data is not equal. Some data is really important and some data is really irrelevant. And so if you're going to be successful as a data quality management person, then you need to prioritize and you need to focus on the data that's most important to the most critical functions in your organization. When we think about the Scientist Skeptic, it's a similar kind of insight, right? Fitness for purpose is a way of thinking about the quality of data, but the assumption that purposes are very different from each other is, or that the criteria for fitness are different, is probably not a correct assumption. If your sales department wants to measure their performance from last quarter, then they want a complete set of data that contains all the transactions, that has accurate numbers with respect to what's been bought and sold, when it was done, who sold it, who bought it, all of those things, right? If you're data scientists who want to predict what products are going to sell in the future, wants to use sales data to do that prediction, they're going to have similar requirements. They want a complete set of data. They want it to accurately represent what products were bought and sold, by whom they were purchased, when they were purchased, how much people paid, all of those things, maybe even the features of those products. They're going to want to know those things in order to predict the future. So even though those uses are very different, they are still have the same criteria for quality. And finally, the accountant. I said they look through the lens of cost and only cost, but they leave out a very important cost, and that is the cost of poor quality. So if we think about the cost of poor quality, we can see that there's a lot of ways in which organizations are already paying for low quality data, but they're not acknowledging that they're paying for low quality data. So when I look at this list, which I've compiled from other writers, you can see that there are direct costs and indirect costs associated with the quality of data. And some of these are easy to measure, and some of these are hard to measure, but they are all there, and we can talk through them. And within your organization, some are going to be more important than others. So I hope most of you were able to hear Doug Laney talk yesterday morning. I would highly recommend his book, Infonomics, to get into more detail about these costs and benefits of high-quality data. But just keep in mind that these are quantifiable, right? And they're interconnected. So if you have a data project that fails because the quality of the data is not up to snuff, then you can look at the direct costs of that project, however much you spent in time and materials for that project. But there's repercussions from a failed project, right? A failed project may have direct impact on customers. It will definitely have an impact on your employees, right? Failure breeds mistrust. That repercusses throughout the organization. So think about these costs. And I note here that this is a conservative estimate, right? So what do I mean by conservative? Well, some people peg these costs at 30 to 40%, some even higher. But even if they're lower, even if instead of 15 to 25%, you have 5 to 10%, in most of our organizations, 5 to 10% of revenue is a lot of money. And you're not going to be able to make that up in other ways in the way that you can make it up if you have higher quality data. So what do we learn from the accountants? Well, one thing we learn is that data quality isn't an abstract goal. Improving data quality has direct effects on the bottom line. It can improve the amount of money that your company makes, or at least the amount of profit that your company makes. It reduces waste. It improves efficiency. So the fact that it has direct effects on the bottom line means you need to be able to talk about that as somebody who works in data quality management. You have to be able to quantify those in terms that people in your organization will understand. And that means you're going to have to identify points of risk and inefficiency and the like. That's not going to make you popular. People don't like to be accused of being inefficient or of injecting risk. So you need to figure out the best ways to talk to people in your company about the ways they can improve things, even as you recognize, that the need for improvement stems from perhaps a poorly designed process or a poorly designed system. So why is it important that we talk about deniers or that we look through this list of deniers, right? The first thing is they're not completely wrong. They're not completely wrong. And we learn a lot of things from them. We learn some very fundamental, important things like listen to your customer, understand how data binds your organization together, focus on things that are important, right? Don't focus on things that aren't important. And use common sense. Use common sense, and also be as objective as possible and talk in terms that your organization can understand about costs and benefits. Those are all fundamental to solving any kind of problem in an organization, whether it's data quality management, general quality management, and other things. So we learn from them. So they're not wrong, but they're not exactly right. And why aren't they right? Well, because as I said earlier, they're driven by fear and pessimism, and a lot of people don't understand what it means to try to apply these methodologies to data. So they think the problem is not solvable. Oh, it'll never be perfect, so we shouldn't do anything about it, right? But that's where they're wrong. This is a solvable problem. It is solvable. And that's why I started by referencing these techniques, right? So I give my 3 questions. There are ways you can answer these questions, very concrete ways. If you want to define what you mean by high quality data, set standards. If people disagree with them, figure out what the right standard is. Get consensus, right? Throw something up there and see what people say. Think about the uses of data and think about the production of data. What are the expectations? Get those on paper. Finding poor quality data, right? Put controls in place. There are simple ways to prevent errors. Use them. Whenever we look at individual problems like zip code or unique identifier, we're looking at a column, the population of a column, right? There are ways to ensure that those things are correct. And then, of course, your columns are related to other columns and are present in tables and those kinds of things. You know, there are ways of solving these problems. So prevent issues from happening. And then set up the mechanisms you need, the issue management process and the ways of funding improvement so that you can actually show measurable improvement. The next thing is we can't forget that people matter, right? Oftentimes data quality problems get figured in terms of technology, technical problems, technical solutions. They're connected with people and process and technology. And of those 3, the most important is people, because people execute processes. People use technology. So you need to work with your people, and you're not going to get rid of any of these stereotypes. You're not going to get rid of any of these perspectives. You have to work with folks that have different perspectives. So work with them. Listen to them and try to share with them what they can do to make things better. Help them alleviate their fears and pessimism and show them what better quality data looks like. And finally, to kind of sum this up, I've come up with this acronym called SAIL. And I thought of this because I thought, you know, if you only do all these things, you can sail through this, right? And I don't mean it's actually that simple, but it's a good way to remember it, right? So what does it mean, right? The first thing is start small, but think strategically, right? Start small, but keep the big picture in mind, because everything you do can contribute to that bigger picture. So if you start setting data standards, then, you know, think about those as enterprise standards, even if you're only using them in one project to start with, right? Think about what you want to build out over time. In order to do that, you have to go to the second letter, the A. Always prioritize. You cannot do everything. Figure out what's important. Do the most important things first. And by always prioritize, I don't mean you sit in your cube and you figure out what's most important. Prioritization is a process of talking to other people about what's important to them. They are your customers, or they are your colleagues or stakeholders that you need to work with. So it's prioritization is part of the process of building consensus. The next, the I, is it's a circle for a reason. So I showed you the improvement cycle, and the way I described it, I said, oh, first you define your standards, and then you do this, and then you do that, right? But I shouldn't have done that. It's a circle for a reason. You can start at any point in that circle. Just keep in mind that the point of an improvement cycle is to improve. It's to move around the circle, figure out how you can make things better, right? So if you have an issue that you're working with, and that's your starting point, that's fine. That's great. If somebody says, hey, we need to report on data quality, and they want to start with reporting, you say, okay, let's figure out how we can do that, right? Or if they say we need data standards, if they go to square one, any of those is a legitimate starting point for improving the quality of data. And then the final one, which really is the point of this talk, is learning. If you want to improve the quality of anything, you have to be open to learning about how to do things better. That means you need to learn things. You need to teach some things, but you really need to be open to what other people are doing and what you can learn from them. So whatever project you're involved with, whatever you actually do, learn from that. The people that you meet, their diverse perspectives, learn from them. Learn from them. Improvement depends on the willingness to be open and the willingness to change your own ways and to help influence other people to change their ways. So if you do all these things, then you will sail through it. It'll be a lot easier if you've got a mindset that supports the efforts that you're trying to do. So I hope this is helpful. I hope you've learned something. And I'll be glad to take questions. If I have time, Mary D. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. This is a great view of the people and the process in particular as it relates to data quality. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on technology. There are popular new areas of technology to address data quality, automated data quality tools, data quality observability tools. Those are two overlapping product segments to help address this. Do you have thoughts on the ability of those new technologies to address some of these problems as well?
Yeah, so when we talk about data quality tools, they kind of fall into a couple of categories, right? One is usually the profiling tool that will produce statistics about the data. And those can be used in a range of ways, right? They can be used for monitoring, they can be used for initial inspection. Then there is the concept of cleansing, right? And I don't even think of those as data quality tools. I think of those as data processing tools or ETL tools, because you're really there applying rules to cleanse data. And then there's the question, this new set of tools, which is called data observability, which I find very interesting, which is essentially applying sort of statistical or data science processes to looking at data and making visible changes in data and patterns in data and the like. So what that means is it's kind of a hyped up profiling tool, but I really dislike the word profiling for this stuff. It's really looking at your data and paying attention to your data. So here's my thought on that. Observability tools, from my point of view, much better in principle than just a profiling tool, because they're applying more robust statistics, but you need to know what to look at. And you need to understand how those tools themselves look at data, how they surface anomalies and everything. And if you know that, then I think they're great for the monitoring and controls part. You still want to prevent issues. You don't want to be cleansing your data because you're allowing it to be created, in error in the first place. It still, for me, comes down to the combination, and it comes down to thoughtfulness about what you want your data standards to be. If you apply the standards at the point of creation, then you don't need to cleanse the data as much. You may need to still process it so it fits together. I had a conversation with some vendors about observability tools, and I thought, wow, great, finally somebody's making a tool that really is about statistical process control that Walter Shewhart invented in the 20s, instead of just profiling and telling me how many nulls are in a non-mandatory column. So I'm excited about that range of tools, but I still think the most important thing is how do you use them? You know, and so it comes, for me, it again comes down to people. How do you want people to use those tools? So thank you for the question. That's a good one. Yes.
So think about your response to the accountant. Made me think that issues of data quality are more about a cost-benefit analysis rather than setting some, we need 98% accuracy. You would think like, each zip code missing costs us $1, but it's easier to remediate the first few than the later ones.
Yep.
Something like those cross.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. So the comment was that issues of data quality come down to a cost-benefit analysis rather than just an arbitrary accuracy level or goal. And you're absolutely correct. And of course, you can marry those two, but because you need to prioritize, you always need to balance what are the costs of this versus what are the benefits, right? So missing zip codes, that's one where really, in 2022, we should be able to cleanse address data because we've been doing it for decades, right? You should be able to prevent issues in address data, or you should be able to cleanse it. And so the question is, how do you apply that? How much does it cost in your organization? And how important is it to your organization? That's definitely a solvable problem. So, yeah, very good.
Thank you, Laura.